and alcohol epidemic, not only here in the city of Brockton, but throughout many of our South Shore communities. Tonight, we're pleased to have with us Ryan Morgan. Ryan Morgan is the principal of the Recovery High School here in the city of Brockton called Independence Academy. Ryan, welcome to A Deadly Silence.
Thanks, Larry. Thank you for having me.
So, Independence Academy, one of 5 Recovery High Schools, as I understand. Can you give us a little background on the whole Recovery High School and how Independence Academy came to be here in Brockton?
Sure. Yeah, thanks again for having me. So the Recovery High Schools were created to provide an environment for high school age students that were struggling with substance use and addiction, a place that was separate from their own high school. You know, a lot of people believe that students who struggle come out of treatment and go back to the same people, places, and things really don't have an opportunity for success in that environment. And so the Recovery High School movement really came about as this step down from treatment that allowed students to be in a school that had recovery supports, that surrounded students with peers who are also in the same mindset, and gave them that safe environment to continue their education and hopefully and ultimately obtain their high school diploma. So Independence Academy was the 4th school that was opened in the state, and North River Collaborative, an organization out of Rockland, worked, I think, pretty closely with the city of Brockton to bring Independence Academy to this region, and we've been open since 2012, so we're in our 5th full academic year. And they just opened up another Recovery High School last year in Worcester.
In Worcester, so that's 5 we have now, I think, here in the Commonwealth now.
Correct, yeah.
And when we talk about the North River Collaborative, they're kind of like a management oversight of the educational as well as the clinical resources that are available to those students. Talk a little bit about the clinicians that are there who are, in essence, some of them are teachers as well, I understand.
Yeah, so the structure of the program really is consists of teachers who have some professional development and some training and some education around the area of substance abuse, but also trauma and mental health issues. And so the staff really as a whole is trained to work with and provide that environment for students who struggle. Most of the students that we have do have trauma histories. Most of the students that we have do have mental health issues as well, as is the case with many people who struggle with substance abuse. Not everybody, but a large population. And so the teachers are trained in those areas, and we have continuous professional development in those areas. And then we have 2 counselors as well, full-time counselors that work at the school. One of them is a licensed independent clinical social worker. She is our recovery counselor. She teaches classes like skill building, life skills and skill building, and works with students on, really identifying triggers and coping skills and things like that. And the other counselor is an adjustment guidance counselor, but also does a lot of the, crisis counseling and things like that, trying to help students, manage their day and be able to ultimately really engage in their academics and work through their high school education program.
So during the course of a normal class day, there's a combination of both the educational requirements that any student would be required to have upon graduating high school, in addition to, as you mentioned, the peer support and the clinical excellence that is available to those students if they happen to walk in and be in crisis on a given day, as could happen at any time.
Yeah, exactly. Our main focus, and I think sometimes the perception of Recovery High Schools is maybe not as accurate as it should be. Our main focus during the day is to help these students with their academics, to help them get their high school diploma. We're creating an environment that has supports, both with the clinical support staff that we have, but also really with the peer support that they have. So really throughout the day, students have access to their peers that go to school there for support, any of the staff, but really counseling support at any point during the day. And so academics is our priority. However, we can quickly change our priorities should a student present with issues that would require us to do so.
I think it's interesting for the listening audience out there to kind of understand that, although you identify as a recovery high school, and that's under the Department of Public Health's heading that your leadership falls under, but that when that student successfully completes your program, they're really graduating with the equivalent of an actual high school education that I understand is basically going to be presented from their local community, not a recovery high school diploma.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So students who transition to the recovery high school, we communicate and work closely with their sending school district. And so if, for instance, a student transferred from Brockton High School and felt that Independence Academy was going to be their best opportunity to finish their high school education and work on their recovery efforts, if they make it to their graduation date and they're still enrolled with us, their diploma comes from the Brockton Public Schools. It doesn't come from Independence Academy or North River Collaborative or anything like that. So.
And that would be the same for any of the supporting cities and towns that are part of the South Shore community that would refer students from that.
Yeah, and so really on any given day, we have students who are graduating with all sorts of different requirements. So some students have a 4-year science requirement. Some students have a 3-year science requirement. Just depends on what their specific town is looking for. But ultimately, they all graduate with a diploma from whichever town it is that they were previously attending.
Now, how does, it's as a parent of, I had 2 sons who were addicted to the substance abuse issues that we see going on. This more or less was actually one during high school years, one afterwards. But how does a parent know about Independence Academy, for instance, if they should be confronted with I call it a disciplinary issue normally within the normal high school arena, and it may be identified as a substance abuse issue. How does a parent go about finding about Independence Academy?
I think it's an excellent question, because I think it's probably one of our biggest hurdles is how do parents get to know about us unless you have been in the system, working with different resources, and people and you're comfortable saying, my son is struggling right now and we need to get him some help, and you're talking to somebody who is aware of us. Unless you've had those conversations or unless you're out there really searching, there aren't really many ways for parents to find us unless they're looking for us. Now, when students go to treatment, if they go to a DPH-funded facility like Castle here in Brockton or Motivating Youth Recovery out in Worcester, the expectation is that as the clinical team there is working with a student to discharge and come up with an aftercare plan, that the recovery high school option is brought up as a possible best, next step in terms of how can we maintain the work that you've been doing here while you've been with us, away from everybody, as you transition back to your normal life or what, is supposed to be your normal life. They bring up the recovery high school and can facilitate that referral process. But I'll tell you, I don't believe that school districts are referring students here, and I think that for me is concerning, and has certainly, I think, had an impact on our enrollment, and more importantly, I think it's had an impact on high school students getting the support that they need.
I kind of will agree with that concept of, are the school districts realizing the opportunity that Independence Academy would offer to a student that would be dealing with a substance abuse disorder concern and allow them to continue their education. I did a little bit of consulting a few years back when Independence Academy's enrollment was only about 35%. And we're saying we've got this major epidemic issue, that is definitely touching our high school, population out there. Why is enrollment so low? And, I was pretty surprised to find 2 real significant issues that, one, school districts don't want the perception that there's a drug problem in their environment, in their school, and they're also concerned about the funding aspects associated with that student. But I think the missing piece is the parent needs to know they have a right to send that student.
That's right.
To request the transfer of that student.
Yeah, and so there are state regulations that if a student has a diagnosis of a substance use disorder, they have the right to attend a recovery high school, and there's nothing a district can do to stop that. and that was put into place years back and is still in effect now.
But the parents don't know that, really.
Well, they don't.
Yeah.
And you bring up a good point about, a lot of school districts don't want to say we have an issue or we have a problem. And, I think that the tide may be changing a little bit in that area, because I think for so long, or for the last couple of years at least, people have been saying, no one wants to admit it's in their town. So I think people are finally saying, okay, it's in my town. I think the second part of that is, yeah, it's in my town, but if the student goes to the recovery high school, then, that's taking a piece out of our budget that we really didn't account for, back last spring as we were finalizing our budget. And so now we have to come up with $10,774 to transfer over to Independence Academy. I don't think those conversations are being had out loud, but I think that there's got to be a reason why we have so few students at our school, given the crisis and the epidemic that's out there. And I think that there is a gap in schools being outwardly open about this being a possible solution, or at least a step in the right direction for students.
Yeah.
But I will say that our school isn't for any student that's having some disciplinary issues in school and missing school and not doing well academically. So when a school meets with a family, I guess if the continuum worked like it should, the school would refer the student to services and supports, and then those services and supports may recommend Independence Academy. So can a school district really assess whether or not the student has a substance use disorder and then would ultimately qualify for the recovery high school? No, but...
Well, the guidance teams really don't have that clinical training per se.
They don't.
Right,
but
yeah.
At the same time, I don't know how much school districts are referring parents to treatment facilities, and then ultimately in the end kind of suggesting that students may come to our school.
Yeah.
So.
But when we look at the larger school systems here in the South Shore, such as the City of Brockton, or we look at the Bridgewater-Raynham school system as an example, I believe those school systems have step-down programs that they probably refer those students that may be dealing with, a substance abuse issue or some mental health issue into their internal programs. Is that what you're seeing?
Again, I mean, it's an excellent point, and it's something that I think is really doing some damage. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but I think school districts are doing what they can to create programs for kids who are struggling. And I think that there's this misconception out there that if we dedicate a room that's maybe got some low lighting and a couch and 2 dedicated staff members that have some clinical background, that we can help these students who are struggling. And to be honest, there is probably a population at the school that would benefit from that environment. However, when we're talking about something as intricate as substance abuse, that really, like I had mentioned earlier, folds in some mental health issues, some trauma history, that type of environment doesn't necessarily meet all of the needs for a student. And the biggest, the research out there says the most impactful resource you can give an adolescent struggling with substance abuse are peers who are struggling with substance abuse. And so when you take a student and you put them in a room and you provide work for them, and there's counseling there, and it's supposed to be a very supportive and therapeutic milieu, you're missing that piece of where we're surrounding you with 30 other kids who are also in recovery, who are trying to fight the fight. The world of recovery really is grounded in that peer-to-peer support, and it's true for adolescents. And so those programs probably can serve a purpose for a great population or a good population, but I would say definitely not for students struggling with substance abuse.
Okay. One of the other interesting aspects of when I was doing the consulting was the fact that the school is located here in the city of Brockton, but in order for you to be able to get students to the school is a transportation challenge.
Yeah.
Has anything changed in the last couple of years in regards to that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot has changed, and it's still a struggle, and it's a huge struggle for us. We service the whole southeast region, so we service really from Weymouth over to Mansfield and Norton and Attleboro, down all the way to the water, and really the Cape. There isn't a school down the Cape. So you're talking students from, we just admitted a student from Westport. You're talking students from Westport, Dartmouth, New Bedford, Fall River. How do we get those students up to Independence Academy? There really is no funding mechanism right now for transportation. We're located in Brockton, which was, I think, done for a number of reasons, but public transportation being, one of the key pieces, as well as accessibility through, Route 24 and things like that. So you think that there would be some benefit to that, but, transportation has just been, for all schools, a huge hurdle in terms of getting kids to and from, because we are regional schools and they're coming from all over. We tried to pass some legislation last year that was supported by a lot of legislators and had some movement for a little while, but ultimately fell short. Right now, we as a group of Recovery High School principals and, again, Joanne Haley Sullivan, the Executive Director for North River Collaborative, and some other people are working with DPH in the Department of Education to formulate some regulations for Recovery High Schools. And they've made it clear that any transportation funding or anything like that would have to come out of the legislative process and not through, establishment of regulations. So it's the biggest reason why students don't come to Recovery High Schools, as far as we know, who are accepted or who have the opportunity, who have that information presented to them, is because they don't have a way to get here.
One of the other bigger hurdles in the beginning of your program back in 2012 was kind of a requirement that a student be 30 days clean prior to admission to the program. And that was kind of, when I looked at it, saying, whoa, time out. If a student's diagnosed and ultimately determined to have a substance abuse issue, why a 30-day lag before they got into the program?
Yeah.
What's happening in that arena?
Yeah, so we've done away with that. When I took over a couple years ago, we did away with that requirement, and really for a number of reasons. One being, if a student goes to the Castle program here in Brockton, an adolescent detox facility, they're really there for 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So that's not even 30 days. So what you'd be saying is, you've been there for 2 weeks, and the Recovery High School would be a great option, but you got to go back to Brockton High for 2 weeks, remain sober and stay straight.
And the environment you were
right,
maybe,
and then once you can do that, then you should apply. And so, it's kind of a crazy recipe. So we've done away with that. And I would say the one word that describes what we're trying to create at our school and what we expect for everybody involved is honesty. And so if a student comes to us and says, I'm struggling, I'm using substances, I want to stop, and I'm willing to be honest about my use, I'm willing to be honest about my attempts to stop using and my struggles, I want to come to the school, we'll take that student. We assess their honesty and their level of commitment to recovery. And so we've had students who have come in for an interview, and we asked them when their last use was, and it was the night before.
Yeah.
But they're coming to us because they want some help and they want some support. And so
Which is one of the first steps in the recovery process, the admission that I need help.
Exactly. And as a teenager, it's so hard. As adults, I mean, it's hard anyways, but as a teenager, that is really difficult. As a 15-year-old, as a 14-year-old, to say I have an issue with substances, I'm struggling with drug use, and I think I might be addicted, that's, for a teenager to do that, that's a really difficult step to take, I think.
Now, there must be a real sense of pride and accomplishment for yourself as a principal, your teaching staff, even the parents of those individuals who have enrolled and successfully completed the program. Talk about that a little bit.
It's great. I mean, it's great being able to help students and families. I think that the staff that we have at the school, I would say everybody loves their job. It's tough work, obviously, but being able to take students at their lowest, coming out of periods of maybe heavy drug use and really negative experiences at school, and being able to kind of show them an environment that's welcoming, that's non-judgmental, it's really, it's so rewarding personally and professionally. But, for them to receive their diploma, our graduation every year is just, it's a tearjerker for sure.
I've attended one. It really is.
Yeah, I mean,
it
the
really
kids,
is.
it's the struggles that these kids go through just to get through high school is just so unimaginable. and to finally get to that point of receiving their high school education. Their families are so proud, and so many of these kids have had counselors and therapists and mentors, and that come from everywhere to see these guys achieve that goal, that they set for themselves. It's just great to see everybody that's worked with these guys for so long come together. So, working at the school certainly does, give you a really rewarding feeling, particularly on those days.
Is there a little bit of maybe a follow-up or an outreach after maybe a student might graduate? Is that any of that taking place?
We have an open door policy. We do. And I really try to encourage that with students who have graduated and students who have attended our school and then have moved on. In fact, at our last graduation, we had 2 students who didn't even finish with us. They had transitioned back to their home district, which students have the opportunity to do at any point. So these guys attended with us both for about 2 years, one for a little bit longer, and then in their senior year said, I want to go back to my school and I want to finish my senior year at my high school. I wouldn't say that that's always the best decision to make. These 2 guys decided that was their, what they wanted to do, so we helped them do that. We still invited them to our graduation ceremony. They participated. We still consider them our graduates. And, we really open our doors to any student that's ever walked through our halls at any point to come in and visit, to get some help, get some support. We had a student who graduated 2 years ago. One morning we got to school. It was just before 8 o'clock, and he was sleeping on our doorstep. Needed some help, and had relapsed, and had a connection with our staff, and he said, I need some help. I'm struggling. And so we brought him in. We got him breakfast. We gave him a bed to sleep in the nurse's office. Yep. And tried to get him back on his feet. So
that compassion that they learned during that period of time while they were enrolled there.
You really just hope that they connect with adults. That they connect with us, and that they see that we're honest people that are, again, not judgmental, and really just there to help them and support them. And a lot of times in this type of work, whether it's a substance abuse school or a regular alternative school or a high school, it's not until years later that students, the light kind of clicks and says, man, those guys are really out to help me, and they come back and say, I appreciate the work that you did. So,
go back a little bit on the logistics, because obviously over the last year and a half or so, there was the casino effort to site a casino on the property of the Brockton Fairgrounds, which is where your school's located, and there might have been thought of relocating the school potentially if that were to happen. Is anything in the works? Again, given the challenge of servicing the entire South Shore community,
maybe exactly.
Another newer, more geographically better location.
Yep, exactly. So one of the first things that I tried to do when I came on board at the school 3 years ago was to try to assess why the enrollment was so low. I think at that point we had 5 students showing up, and we're a school that's built for 40 or 50, and that's what we can handle. And so I tried to look at all the factors, and as I went out and did trainings, or as I went out and did kind of marketing things with different groups, I would ask, why don't you refer students to the school? And some people said it was the location, some people said transportation, and so we really tried to look at each one of those aspects. And so certainly the casino and the prospect of the casino, come in and be right in our backyard or front yard, forced us to put some action steps in to say, do we need to move? If there's a casino here, we can't have a recovery high school right next to a casino. And so we did start looking, and then we really started considering our placement within the geographic region that we serve, and are we really in a central location? Weymouth is a school that a student from Weymouth could really either go to the Boston school or to the Brockton school. It's kind of split, and so there's some overlap there. Whereas a student from Hyannis has no school to go to. Correct. And so we talked a lot about maybe going a little bit further south to be a little bit more central, so that we could at least be somewhat more accessible to those schools. It's not off the table. I love being in Brockton. I really do. There's a lot of resources and great people around that support the school. However, we just can't seem to find the click with the community of Brockton to find students that are struggling and help them, get the resources
And I
they
think
need.
that's an important thing to realize is that, Independence Academy, a lot of people think it's part of the Brockton school system,
Yeah.
but it is not.
Correct.
So, that clicking, as you're saying, and it's not just the Brockton system per se, it's all the systems that you're able to service throughout the South Shore. There always seems to be a little bit of pushback on getting that information out on the wonderful opportunity that Independence Academy presents, to the families out there.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, So, what do you see going forward in relationship to the recovery aspects for the education piece?
A big thing that I see moving forward is honestly an expansion of services that we can offer. And what I mean by that is people talk about this continuum that exists, of continuum of care that exists in the state and for substance abuse and all that stuff. The continuum would look like, detox, a step down, or long-term residential treatment, and a structured outpatient program, or an intensive outpatient program, or something like that. There is nothing in this region for adolescents other than detox, long-term, and a recovery high school, and we're not even really treatment. And so there's a great documentary that's coming out. It's out, and I've seen it a couple times, and it's really well done. It's done by Greg Williams, who did The Anonymous People, and it's called Generation Found, and it highlights the adolescent care and the shortfalls and things like that out in Texas. Texas has a number of recovery high schools out there, and so there are these things called alternative peer groups, where, for me, that's the missing link. It's the missing link in the city of Brockton. It's the missing link in the communities throughout the South Shore, where a student who's struggling in school right now either has to go to detox for 3 weeks or 2 weeks away from home, or what? Maybe see a counselor or something like that. But there's no real intermediary step. And so a lot of times people perceive marijuana as, it's not an opiate. Among the opioid crisis, I think people who struggle with marijuana are getting kind of passed over because it's not really that big of a deal. However, it does potentially lead to other things, but it also causes all sorts of problems. Right now, there's nothing for a student to do other than go to detox. And so I think we really need to create a system where there are these maybe alternative peer groups where students are going after school, they have access to counseling, individual and family therapy, they have access to some pro-social activities, but they're surrounded by other peers who struggle with substance abuse. And then from there, the determination can be made either to further treatment or more intense treatment, or to a recovery high school, and also the step down from treatment before a recovery high school or in conjunction with a recovery high school could be a linkage with a program like that. So I have a strong belief in that, and I believe that that's a missing piece. I'd love to do some work, and I plan on doing some work this year on communicating with some stakeholders to see what we need to do to put something like that in place. But I think with the hurdle of trying to get us out to parents, with the hurdle of schools maybe not really feeling comfortable referring kids to us, this could be a place that communities could be made aware of, that students could be referred to.
Well, Ryan, believe it or not, our time is up.
I believe it.
I want to say thank you for coming in and sharing with us the successes of Independence Academy here in Brockton and the South Shore. And congratulations to you and your teachers and the students who are enrolled there and the great job you're doing.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks
again
for being
having
with
me.
us tonight.
Appreciate it.
On behalf of all of us here at The Deadly Silence, we'll see you again next week.